So we're really excited today. Some of you already know Ruddy Roye. He has been a part of the Leica family for a long time. He actually came to us just a couple of months ago at the beginning of our Stay Home with Leica series. But for those of you who don't know, Ruddy Roye is a Brooklyn-based portrait and documentary photographer. He was born in Montego Bay, Jamaica. He uses his camera as a tool that allows him to document the world around him as he sees it. The images he produces speak to the human condition, addressing the myriad instances of suffering and injustice that he witnesses daily. And he's done this all over the globe. And the images are often overlooked by these communities, yet these images that he produces of events such as the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, the Black Lives Matter movement from the onset until now, chronic homelessness, and his own personal project that we love, When Living is a Protest, do not merely exist to capture misery, but they also convey resilience and compassion from the subjects that are in those photos. So please join me in welcoming back Ruddy Roye, and today our series is The Voice of Change. Hi, Ruddy.
Hi,
Thanks for
everybody.
joining us.
Welcome.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, Leica. Thank you, Kira, thank you, Beatrice.
So we're here today to talk. I mean, you're no stranger to what's going on today with the protests. You've been documenting the voices of the underserved for almost over a decade now. You consistently find yourself in communities with stories that are not often documented. And I'd like you to maybe talk first about what motivated you to source these stories and to document these stories.
Well, it's funny that if I go back as far as my life as a writer, when I worked in Jamaica, I remember my first story being something that I wrote about when people were living in tents after we had Hurricane Gilbert. Fast forward to living in America. I remember when, right after Katrina, I was watching, I didn't know how or why I should race down to New Orleans to tell a story where there were like 500 photographers or the media. But I remember sitting down watching a documentary by Spike Lee, When the Levees Broke. And in it, Harry Belafonte said, you know, the reason America took so long to go to the South is because the South is filled with the forgotten people. And I remember sitting on my couch saying to myself, what do the forgotten people look like? And it was that motivation. It was those words that gave me the motivation to go to the South and try to look for who Harry Belafonte called the forgotten people. And I drove from New York to Mobile, Alabama. And I started to photograph the aftermath of Katrina. I went from Mobile to Biloxi, Mississippi, to Gretna, Louisiana, and New Orleans.
How long was that trip? This fascinates me for so many reasons, because going on that journey, there's so much, I mean, especially here in the North. I'm from Chicago, but my family is from Mississippi and Louisiana, Biloxi as well. And so much of Black culture, of course, is rooted here from the US in the South. And so as you traveled even from one city to the other, what are some of the I guess, surprises or motivations that even kept you on that journey to capture a scene like this? And then if you can kind of dive in and tell us what we're witnessing here.
I think the first thing that hit me was cotton. A field of cotton in bloom, driving past, seeing it, and I burst out into tears. Because it was also, I'm also a photographer that I delve into history. Like no matter what I'm doing, no matter what assignment I have, I research. I do a lot of research. And I remember seeing this whiteness, this sea of whiteness for the first time, driving into the South, and I pulled over and I bawled. And I quickly snapped back because in Jamaica we had sugarcane. It was the same cash crop that slaves were asked to produce. And I go, how is it that I don't cry when I see sugarcane, but I'm crying when I see cotton? And so I immediately went back to, all right, let's get back to the story. And this is something I photographed. This was actually one of the last images I photographed when I was when I was documenting the Katrina series. I was actually done. I was sitting in my car waiting for another photographer to finish his work. And this guy walks up to me and he asked me, could I photograph him? He has a newborn. And I remember saying to him, dude, I'm done. Like I had nothing left. I'm drained. And he goes, please, man, I just came from Angola. And you know, Angola is a prison in New Orleans. And so I said to myself, you know, I don't have this picture. I don't have a newborn picture. And so I went back to his house, and there I saw his child's mom lying on the bed with the baby between, right in her arms. And he went and he sat right beside her. And even then, I had not made up my mind what the picture was going to be. But as soon as I started to hear their interaction was one where she kept saying to him, like, so I'd ask, what was the baby's name? And because he had introduced himself, let's say his name was Ruddy Roye, she said the baby's name was Amy Harris. And I was like, it's not his name. And then I realized what that was. And I remember it appealed to me because at the time I was going through some what it meant to be a man, what were the responsibilities of a man. And I knew immediately in that moment what he was going through. He had just come up from prison, he had no job, she had a child, and there was a sense of camaraderie. And that's when the picture made sense to me. And that's who I am actually as a photographer. Usually I find pieces of me in each image that I take. And that's the only time that the picture feels authentic, when I can relate to it on any level.
And with these images, and we'll take a look at the next one here. With these images, you're not just taking a photograph. You're not just making a portrait. You're having conversations. You're taking something back, and there's an exchange. And that exchange, I believe, helps you become that conduit, right, for these unheard or forgotten people. Could you tell us about the third image here in this series?
So while I was photographing her, I wanted to move her. I wanted to like maybe sit her up, and she wouldn't move. Everything that I said to her, she ignored. And I kept wondering, was she also angry with me as a male? The fact that he went and got me. So, but just to get the image, I chose not to take it personally. And a year later, I drove back to Gretna, and I drove back to where they lived. And she was up walking around, and the baby was a year older. So I said, can I take another portrait? And she was like, fine. And then as she sat on the stoop, I saw why she didn't want to pose. She didn't want to move from the bed in the original image. She had an ankle bracelet. And I guess she was ashamed at the time of what that stigma meant. And so I have no judgments. I mean, I photograph humans. I do not care what brought you to me. I try to photograph the person who's in front of me, and the conversations that we're having, I hope, reveals who that person is. The picture beside her, I usually just say to my audience that she's 15, she's pregnant, and she has a 3-year-old, almost 3-year-old son beside her. That's all I've ever needed to say with that image. And the picture to the far left is one of the sweetest pictures I've ever taken in the South. Quickly, Miss Tucker fed me every day at the Waffle House. Mr. Tucker is someone that she spoke about while I was having dinner. And when she knew it was my last day, she asked me if I could take a picture of her husband, she and her husband. And I said yes. Went up to her house. He came out like 15 minutes later. I had already set up. I was using a 4x5 actually. And I photographed 4 images. All 4 images I questioned. And he saw my face and he said to me, "What's wrong, old young man?" And I said, "There's a clothesline behind you that I hate," because he was cutting the picture. And he turned around, took a machete, and he chopped the line. And I was like, why would he do that? Because the garden was so immaculately beautiful. It was like, you could tell that it was care. Why would he just chop the line? I photographed it, and then he walked up to me and he said, "Can you take one more image?" In my mind, I am like, I've already just spent $120 because I'm thinking $20 a sheet for the Polaroid. I'm like, man, he's going deep into my pocket now. But he walks up to me and he said, "My wife and I wants to give you this rose because we don't know when we'll see you again, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to give you another rose on another Sunday." And I was like, "Oh, I don't have a picture of a couple with a rose." So I shot it. 2 months later, he died. And then everything just came crashing. I knew exactly
Wow.
I knew exactly why he cut it. I mean, and then it was then that I looked at his hands and they were swollen. He came out of his dying bed to make this picture, and
Wow.
he wanted that picture to be perfect.
Talking about voices of change, I think the strong thing here is kind of knowing the stories behind this, starting with the woman on the right who didn't move from that bed when you were shooting her with her partner and their new baby. And she was, perhaps afraid to show that she was on house arrest. Um,
Right.
but what's compelling about it is that you went back. And so I think just the act of you showing up and going back there a year later made her feel so much significance to then reveal more of herself to you.
Of course.
And
Of
then
course.
moving over to the image in the middle where a young Black girl has her first child just as a preteen, and then she's pregnant with another. And there's so much within her that she wants to be seen to kind of let you
Mm-hmm.
take that image. And I think on the left, the adoration that this woman has for her husband, the look of love in her eyes. I think the way that you capture the kind of multi-layers of Black familyhood here, it's really compelling because we can all see stories like this unfold before us if we just open our eyes to see what's there. So
Yeah, and Ruddy, you mentioned a few times that you make a photograph, and sometimes the desire to do so is because you don't have that photograph yet, that you haven't done that yet. Could you tell us a little bit about how you got started in photography and who those influences are?
So I actually started, I wanted this morning I got up and I knew this question was gonna come. And I literally, it's in my email. I can show you my email. And I know it's going to be hard to do on Zoom. I found 3 images from my first assignment in Jamaica. I knew you were going to ask this question. It was on the railroad. And my first assignment was to photograph people that were now living on the defunct railroad while the government was thinking of bringing the train back. And the story was, in my heart was, what are these people going to do when the train comes back? Because they're living literally right beside the railroad. And it was my pull away from the old style of you being a writer and being accompanied by a photographer. I kept saying, why don't I just learn the craft so that I could control both part of the narrative, as opposed to writing a story and saying to the photographer, I want this picture, that picture, that picture, that picture. And that was the beginning of photography for me. It was walking 120 miles from Montego Bay to Kingston on the defunct train line, learning how to be a photographer.
Let's move on to Cleveland. Now, you found this doctor who was finding new treatments for a community that was at risk of losing limbs. Could you tell us the story?
So Dr. Faccaretti is a doctor from New Jersey who both his parents have diabetes. And so I guess there's this motivation to heal people who are diabetic. And so he goes, after school, he goes to Mississippi to do his residency, I guess. And he finds all his clients, African-American, who were going to the hospital suffering from some symptoms of diabetes, but they were getting their limbs cut off. And so after having fights with the white doctors that were there, he decided to open up this clinic where he would start treating his clients by putting a catheter from their hip all the way down to remove the blockage in their arteries so that he could save their limbs. And it was marvelous to and I have to give a shout out to Pro Republic for assigning me that story. It was marvelous to meet people who were living with their limbs because of what Dr. Fakaredi had done. And his motivation was, the big statistics that jumped out at him was somebody who had lost their limb would only live up to 5 years after they had lost their limb. And he felt like he had to stay in Cleveland, Mississippi in order to be a champion for these voices.
And I see that with your work as well. I mean, you talk about how you got started in photography and how you chose to be both the writer and essentially the visual storyteller of these stories, where you got this start, and were you documenting areas of injustice or areas where there is, challenges that are not being heard, right? So you see that back in Jamaica. You see that same theme during Katrina with with the forgotten people, and that you see it again here, where you find this doctor, with the help of Pro Republic, to support those voices that are being challenged by systemic processes. Let's look, this image here. Could you tell us about how you made this photograph?
I can't go any further without saying that one of the decisions, I got to this intersection where I wanted my images to have a certain look. And the only thing I could think about was creating a portrait package, and using the Noctilux has in a way given me the look, this look that I have, like, I've sought ever since I was using 4x5. I've always wanted this very simple, there's no clutter. Everything that you see in this image is something that I wanted you to see. I wanted you to see his medicines behind him. I wanted you to see his limb on his lap. And I wanted there to be some level of peace in the image. And it's something that I was able to use. If you go back, no, don't go back, but the black and white images from the first black and white images were shot with a 4x5. And the Noctilux that I use with my SL creates the same look and the same feel. There's something that I want you to see. There's a message, a silent message that I want to impart, a feeling, an essence that I want you to see when I photograph a portrait. I want you to be able to, I want to introduce you to this person. I'm not looking for drama. I'm looking to introduce you to the person's soul, which is why it's always a quiet image.
You know, it's compelling. I think of the way that you can present something which can be really complicated for the viewer to experience as well. So seeing someone kind of without their limbs, but just being able, you just spoke to kind of seeing their soul, looking to their eyes. They're not asking for pity. They're actually content and respected and existing beyond their circumstance. And I think in the world that we live in, where there are so many images that we see on the screen, there's so much media that can come at us, especially now that we're on our screens more and we're working from home more. We don't get the visual stimuli of being out and about. As you look to choose each story or scene or the communication that you want to give, what's been your go-to regarding your favorite piece of equipment, and how do you capture that story so that it's not just another image glossed over by the people that see it?
I think one of the most important tool I think I carry, something that nobody sees in my hand, are the songs that I grew up with. Bob Marley, Dennis Brown, Peter Tosh, the Mighty Diamonds. They all sang about the forgotten people. And it took me a while to get to, I was challenged. It took a challenge. Somebody said, all you photograph are poverty porn. And I remember I was on my way to exchange my cue at the Leica office. Remember that, Kiran?
I do.
And I was driving and I was troubled by what this guy said online. And on my way, I was listening to Bob Marley, and he said, cold ground was my bed last night, and rock was my pillow. And I go, Bobby's singing about a homeless guy. Ready again, cold ground was that's a homeless person. And I started to listen to how our singers were social justice champions. And I immediately burst into this aha moment that maybe I'm not a photographer. Maybe I'm a reggae singer who uses a camera. And from there, I just realized that I just need to be true to this, and I need to find the tools that made me feel like I was doing what I wanted to do. And it was a conscious decision. I remember calling Kiran and I said, Kiran, I want this. And Kiran was like, oh, I need to go think about this. And she came back and she said, we were able to make this deal. And I asked her for a Noctilux, and I asked her for an SL. And I shot George Floyd's family portraits, Mr. Ben Crump, everybody that I photographed for the past almost 2 years with that camera, with that lens, because it makes it evokes the spirit that's inside of me, and it puts it out with the voice that I wanted to tell people about the suffering that I see.
Absolutely.
It's simple. I don't want a lot of stuff. I want to keep the portraits simple. I want them to evoke the spirit that I see in front of me, and I want to do it in a way that transmit the pain or the injustices that I see.
And you're very selective about what tools, and I know this firsthand because right before a project, you know exactly the right lens, the right camera, and you know this going in of what you want to achieve with those images, with your stories. And I see this image here, and we're going into now social distancing and COVID. And what struck me about this image is how similar it is to the image that you made in Cleveland of the gentleman holding his artificial leg in his lap. And I see a theme of loss here. And I know you're seeing it too from story to story, where this gentleman has lost his livelihood as a musician. And could you tell us more about the series of social distancing?
So I believe that everything that I've ever shot is the Black experience. And what's attached to the Black experience is this theme of what it means to live at a loss. I remember growing up with my mom, she would always say, Ruddy, you can't have everything, you can't get everything. And I think looking back, she was trying to prepare me for the idea that I might not get everything that I want. And how do I deal with loss? Because I remember when I was 7 years old, my mom beat my butt for about 6 blocks because I had removed a person's figurine. It was like a cowboy off their dresser. And I think that was the point. The point was you have to learn to live with loss. And loss is something that I see everywhere that I go through the Black experience, starting from the emancipation and the idea that nobody advocated for us to get work. And so we've had to make up work. And then if you apply Jim Crow to that, we were told that we couldn't own property, we couldn't marry, we have been hearing we can't get bank loans. And so this sense of loss, I think, is a part of our DNA on a very cellular level. And so when I sit in front of a portrait, I am seeing the same story being repeated in the eyes of everybody I photograph. And that is the birth of when living is a protest to me. The very act of living is our protest. The very fact that we're here and present speaks to the fact that we're not victims, that we're going to find a way to overcome. And I look for that defiant spirit, and I try to photograph it. I try to capture it.
So we're looking at right now your series documenting the COVID pandemic, where you focused on the essential workers. Could you tell us about these images?
So National Geographic asked me to go into the streets and photograph who I saw. First of all, they asked me, who did I see when I go out? And I was like, I see a lot of Black folk, Black and brown folk working, going to work. Different from Manhattan, where I would go for blocks and there would be nobody on the streets. In Brooklyn, it felt busier. It felt like there were people still out. This is my post, the person who dropped off my letters. She came to I stuttered a while ago because I did not want to use the word postman. And it felt, postwoman felt like we didn't start using postwoman yet. So I was like postperson.
Postal worker.
Postal worker, right. And she comes every day. And I see her use her elbows. I see her, she can't afford to stay home. And yet she puts her life on the line to let, somebody says, the letter carrier. Thank you. She put her life on the line, and it wasn't just her. I have a friend, Hoyty, who drives MTA bus, and Hoyty would tell me, he's terrified because Hoyty has a family. There's Dr. Bob Gore. Dr. Bob Gore's wife is pregnant. Dr. Bob Gore works in the ER. And he was like, I had to go to a Airbnb to make sure that while I'm able to do my job as a caregiver, that I don't bring the virus back to my family. And there was also this nurse who was having a hard time because, and I think this is the part that was bothering the essential workers, that their colleagues were dying. It wasn't just the people that they serve were dying, that their colleagues, the people that they work with, were also dying. And that brought the virus home to them. That was very close to them. So thus the story.
Yeah. But we talk about the virus as being more than just the coronavirus. Tell us how this feeds when living is a protest, as we're experiencing now with the protests.
I think also Nat Geo wanted me to look at another aspect of the coronavirus, and that was because Black folk or Black and brown folk were so were the people that were affected most by the virus. We wanted to look at why, and so we looked at where we lived, what was around us, what was our healthcare like. Do we have as good a healthcare as everybody else in America? We also looked at the fact that we don't own our cars, private vehicles. Some people keep asking me when they find out that I travel around during this time. They're like, "Did you take the plane or did you drive?" Essential workers more than not do not own their own cars, so they are on public vehicles. They come home, and there's a food desert in their neighborhoods. So maybe they have to go further to buy food. So again, they're putting their lives at risk. There's not a Whole Foods or a Trader Joe's close to them, or even a market. So they have to now go out, they have to order food. There's always this idea that they're extending themselves to becoming in contact with the virus. And so those were some of the things we looked at, that because of poverty, because of the systemic racism, and we have to look at the institution of racism. I think I was listening to CNN recently, talking about the idea of these overpass. The overpass were supposed to go over the poor neighborhoods, that richer folks could drive past these poor neighborhoods without even knowing what was going on in these neighborhoods. And so those are the things that I try to talk about in photography. I try to say that as human beings, we have a responsibility to taking care of everybody else around us. And that's what I try to do with image making. This image is actually my birth into the idea of the series, When Living is a Protest. As a dad, I found an amazing attachment to this image. I actually ran to take this image.
Yeah, I was thinking it couldn't have been better staged, because you've got Trayvon Martin up there right against the wall, and then you've got this dad with his son coming right past. And I was thinking,
right.
Did you just hang out there and then this family came by, or did you see the opportunity and go for it?
I actually parked up. I saw the mural and I said to myself, that mural looked empty, like it needs something. And I think I also stopped because I was putting in a GPS. And while my head was down, putting in the address, about 10 or 15 feet away from the mural, I saw this father and son walking up. And I go, I need to get this. And so I ran out of the car and I run down to the mural. And by the time I got to the mural, they were like starting to hit the mural. And so all I could do was, I mean, I don't even know how well. I think I did like an F11 and I went clacker, clacker, clacker. But I also, when I went home and I looked at the image, I saw that the father looked like the father that was behind Trayvon. Same bald head, same shaped face. And I was like, this couldn't be more perfect. So this was actually my doorway into talking about what was happening in America at the time.
I see this theme also. I'm sorry, we'll just go back one slide, but you do a number of photographs with murals. Could you tell us what motivates that line of storytelling?
Murals and words and signage was born out of this idea that people leave their words for us to see. Art is the same thing. There's something that artists wanted us to see. Signage, words, it's your community speaking to you. And again, it goes back to an older way of having. I remember growing up as a child, my mom said that as African people, we talked with the drum, or we wrote on walls or on boards. That we weren't a society that was so into books. There were people, the scribes and griots who wrote, but they're also the ones who told stories. And so I believe that there are griots in our communities who wrote on the wall, who writes on the walls, who paint on our walls. And so I always want to invite that culture or that art into my work as kind of an echo to what the community is trying to say.
And to that point, when you look for those signs, tell us about this image, because there are many stories happening here.
Right now, as we're going through George Floyd, I remember hugging Dr. Benjamin Crump as we were parting. He was going into the hotel. I had to go to my hotel. And he said, from now on, you're family. And when we pulled apart, he said to me, the tragedy is George Floyd is not going to be the last name. And when I tell him, my eyes start to well up, because there is always this hope that this is it. Like, hey, we're going to get it. And this is why this picture is so relevant because even as Trayvon Martin, his story was, we were hearing, after his murder, we were hearing other stories. People were coming forward and saying, this is what happened to us. This was happening in Oklahoma. This is happening in Dallas. This is happening. And so I realized that policing was not only a color issue, but policing was a police issue. And that there were certain facets of our society that maybe didn't know how to deal with it yet, but they're quiet. Even recently, Don Lemon made a call in. He said, you know, our celebrities need to stand up and shout and amplify that we need to have a reckoning, that we need to bring the police, we need to make them more accountable. And so this picture reflects me saying that right after Trayvon was killed, that you have Beyonce and Jay-Z in the background just watching. And here's a black man being arrested by another black man. So for me, I'm trying to say policing is not just a white issue, that policing is a police issue, period.
And this image here, Ruddy, I'm not going to be able to do the justice that you can. This image is heavy. If you could walk us through how you made it and the stories within it.
I learned a long time ago as an image maker that you should sit into an image and allow the nuances to flow, like it's energy. And I remember walking with the procession. This was shot in Ferguson. I came around the corner and I saw this young man with his hands in the air and a target on his chest. And I sat there trying to just make an image. And I waited for elements to come together, to texture it. Because I'm not one of the person who just click a shutter and hope that it's a good image. I like to see layers in the image. And again, you know, I love signage, I love words. And so I wanted to play with the word free and the word no, so we're not free. And to my left, you know, you have this white guy holding up a flag upside down, which is a sign of distress. So I was trying to make sure that we could talk about that we have no resources in the terms of finance, that are we free? No, we're not free. And then you have this kid riding out of frame who is looking maybe at his past, who's maybe looking at what's chasing him. And all these elements come together to create this image of when living is a protest.
Yeah, there's so much in that image. I think if we can go back for just a quick sec, even with like from a cultural point of view, the layaway and financing in the background, like growing up, like it's the part of the way that you acquire things in the Black community is with layaway. It's not something that the more economically advantaged will ever experience or even be given as an option. And so I think even seeing that and, you know, the cautionary cone there. And with the person that's holding the flag upside down, they seem to be naked. I'm imagining they probably aren't, but the vulnerability of there's a lack of protection for that and all these elements coming together culturally to present so many things that are just a part of our experience. We have to lay away things because there is no finance and pulling these things together to unlayer all of the things we have to consider when we step out of the house.
That's a good grab. I'm actually going to use that at the next talk.
That's fine. Take it.
Because you're right. It's in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
That is something that we grow up with. That's really nice. I'm telling you, I'll give you copyright.
No, it's okay. It's just what I see.
Using it. This is Akai Gurley's mom, and she was just really talking about the pain of losing her son to the police shooting. I mean, he was shot in a stairway, a dark stairway, in Brooklyn, at the Pink Houses in Brooklyn. Alton Sterling's son and partner. This picture really pained me because I'm a visual artist and I use images. I use imagery, and I remember growing up looking back at the pictures in our photo album, and here his son won't be able to have pictures to look back to because they were all taken when his father was killed. And so his son actually went out and made a composite of himself and whatever images he could find of his father. And he used an app to make a composite of his father's face so that he could show me. That's what he's showing on his cell phone in that picture.
Ruddy, you get very close to the families that you photograph. We'll go into the next image.
This is actually where Mike Brown was killed. Oh yes, this is his father.
But you're right there. You're right there with the family. What is the process to get connected, and how do you connect with the families at these raw emotional moments?
You introduce yourself, and you know, I lost my father in 2007 very tragically, and there's a hole that's left. I think about my father at least 3 to 4 times a week. There's a hole that's left that I don't think it'll ever be filled. And when you meet somebody who has this same hole, imagine sitting in front of a set of drums and just going, Papa. You hear, they speak to each other on a very spiritual level. I actually bought a 19mm R lens 4 days ago, and it was shipped to me. Thank you to those guys in DC, Leica DC. And that's what I actually shot the funeral with, George Floyd's funeral with, a 19mm lens, because I want to be close. I want to hear your heartbeat when I'm in front of you. And that's the kind of photographer I am. I need to be close. Because I also want to show you what else is going on while this person is in this space. It's not just about the person in front of me. It's about how do we live in the space that we live with everything else that's going on around us. That to me shows more about the detail. I'm looking for the detail, but it shows more about that person when they're able to hold themselves with everything else that's going on around them.
And as you're capturing these stories, right? You're and I have to ask, because with looking at your work on Instagram, you go into detail in your stories, right? Your image, your captions are as important, if not more, than the images that you're making. When you're going through the process, are you also taking notes? I'm just wondering about how you're able to absorb some. Yeah.
I have notes on my notes is packed on my phone. But the significance of that is, one, I know the iconography of the Black image over the years. Two, when I die, I don't want anybody to say, it's one of the reasons why I try not to shoot nudes, or I was photographing during the pandemic recently, and I saw what we would call, I'm trying to find a nice way to say this, somebody who's on crack. There were 2 people on a bicycle, and you can tell that they were under the influence. And they were riding the bicycle, and somebody said to me, "Oh, that's a good," because they saw me with the camera. "That's a great picture," because it was a very sensational image. They were acting, they were like, and I said, "No, I don't need it."
Right.
And
avoiding
in
the
my mind,
exploitation, which is what a
it's
sensation would do.
it's not even, because I can talk about that image. I can take that image and it not look exploitative. Here's the thing though, when I die, I'm not that voice anymore. That image stands alone. And so the words, these long captions, are clothing to me. These long caption is a way of wrapping this image in a way, maybe the same way the pharaohs wrapped their dead. The idea is that when you unveil it, the information will be there. Like, I'm not leaving this image raw for people to like say, "Oh, he was photographing homeless people who look at them." Because we've always been thugs, we've always been deviants, we've always been prostitutes, we've always been all these, everything else except human beings. I've heard police officers use the word animals to describe young black men on a scene. Heard it, not hearsay. I've watched them say, "You guys are animals, thugs." So the caption is to humanize, is to create this. That's also a human being.
So tell us here, what's, speaking of, the humanism, what's going on today is obviously it's motivating people to get out there, make photographs, document, and speak. Could you tell us about this image and the I guess the motivation for this mother here to get out and start protesting?
This woman watched the murder of George Floyd. The video was circling on the internet, and she said the moment he started to call for his mama, who is dead, she started to cry, and she said to her son immediately, "We need to come off social media. We need to stop tweeting. We need to stop Facebooking, Instagramming, and we need to go out and walk like everybody else." She said that part, those lines where he started to cry for his mama, she said the tears just started to come out. And it's funny that I've lived in Brooklyn for 20 years. I've seen this mural for 20 years, and I've never been motivated to use it until while I was in the procession, I saw this mother and son walking along the mural, and I raced over there and I said, "I need to photograph you right at this mural."
When you do that, and I know that you have encounters where you kind of grab an image of someone up close, and then you also kind of will do some at a distance sometimes, and you're also known for returning to places where you've done stories and kind of more in depth. But do some of the people ever ask for images from you, or do you get images to people? Because I'd imagine with the number of photos that you take, that's a consideration as well.
If I can, if usually in this new technology, it's very easy to just email an image or DM an image or text an image. So it has gotten way easier. Back in the days of film, I think maybe 5% of those people got their image. But in this new age, it's quite easy. Like people have DM'd me from Floyd's funeral, and I have sent them images. It's become easier.
And Ruddy, let me ask you, you have been documenting protests for years and years now. Have you seen any changes in from protest to protest? What are you witnessing?
Wow. Really want me to go there? I have looked at images from the 60s, and what I see is whether it was calm or more insightful, whether it was rioting or whether it was protesters being beaten. In the 60s, there was this feeling that it was our protest. We were raging because we were being disenfranchised. We were treated terribly. I walk out into the new age protest, and I see 80% white folks, 20% black folks, and I don't know what to do with that protest. I don't know when they say I can breathe. I don't know who they're talking about. I mean, because white folks can breathe. When I see a white dude on the ground mimicking how George Floyd was killed, I don't know what to do with it. It's beginning to feel more performative. It's beginning to feel less substantive. I don't know what to do. It doesn't feel like it's ours anymore, if I can say that. I've heard people on the street say maybe it's time for us to sit down and for white folks to carry the flag for a bit.
But you mentioned something in your Nat Geo article. You mentioned how that could help the movement, right? You very specific.
Yes, I believe, and it's not coming from me. Malcolm X was asked this question: how could white folks help the movement? And I think it's brilliant and simple. Instead of the police coming to to the marches and kneeling with the marchers. I mean, they can do that too, but it's important that they go back to their police houses and that they reform policing. I don't believe in defunding the police. I believe in appropriating funds and redirecting it somewhere else. I don't know what defunding means. But I also think that there's this video that I put up on my stories where this daughter was talking to her father, both of them white, and the father was basically calling black folks thugs and like they don't know better, they will never be better. And the daughter was like, no, dad, even in your language, you're being racist. Those are the conversations that need to happen. There has to be people going back to their white communities and having this process of really dealing with what it means to be racist. Because marching with us, you're marching with the people who are being victimized. Like we're good. We could handle the march, but we cannot come to your homes and tell your uncle or your aunt that the way they act and talk and behave is racist. That's going to be left up to the people, the white folks who are woke, to do that on our behalf.
And now tell me, what photographers currently are doing work that really resonates with you?
There are a number of photographers doing important work right now. Devin Allen, Sheila Prebright, Michael in DC, Gideon Mendel, Ben Lowy. There are a number of photographers who I think, Marvi Leica, that's Ben's wife. Marvi has been very, I mean, like we touch base all the time to talk about strategies because I don't think the way I'm approaching it is always the best way. So I sometimes pitch it out to a bunch of people and say, you know, am I on the right track? Because I have known black folks to take images that have the white gaze. I have known black folks, I mean, I grew up in a system that said the images had to look this way. So I'm not perfect. So I'm hoping that my colleagues can also say to me, Ruddy, I don't know about that image. And I'm open for that level of honesty and accountability. But you know, there's this, I can't remember her name. There's a young lady who worked for Time in Minneapolis recently that I reached out to, but I knew her by her Instagram name, who's doing amazing work. I actually asked her what camera she used, because I think she'd be amazing if she started using, you know, a good camera like Leica.
Got the hit.
I was gonna say, I think it's brilliant to see that even in your point of view, that you seek the advice of colleagues and others who you know are also out there and are contributing to the documentation of this. What advice would you have for photographers who want to kind of get out and not only like document the protest, but also document kind of the current events or the environment surrounding them? What advice could you offer?
I think you have to do more than click. Especially at a protest where there's an image, every time you blink, there's a new image. It's important to search for something that's authentic. Imagine the narrative that people are going to get 50 years from now. Scholars are going to be in wherever, I don't know how schools and colleges are going to change. But imagine sitting in a room with these new images where 90% of the people who are at these protests are white. You might actually hear people say, you know, if it wasn't for the white folks, black people would not have been, their status would not have changed in America. When we're here because black men and women died for us to march. So we have to be careful about just clicking, that we need to think, we need to search out an image that's authentic to the moment and the movement, and use our eyes in a way that is more instructive.
Oh, you're on mute.
Well, looks like he just muted, but I do want to, you provided this quote and I wanted to be able to share it with the audience here. It says, we need to talk about the issues. Right now we're yelling about a man, a father, a breadwinner, killed on the street by the police. But there's a bigger story we're ignoring. Food deserts, a lack of economy, independence, racist policing. This systemic nature of racism must be confronted. Otherwise, we're playing a game of Jenga, pulling out pieces, putting them back, and hoping the tower doesn't crumble. We need to rebuild from the ground up. Those who are woke need to wake up others, take the fight to places that Black folks don't have access to. And I think it kind of wraps up just the many kind of losses that we've kind of described in the presentation here, where we start with Katrina and there's just the loss of mobility, the loss of access. And then we go over to Cleveland and you said there's the loss of, you know, people's limbs and restoring that. And then moving into, you know, COVID, and it's like the loss of access, the loss of economy as well, and kind of bringing all this loss together, and then coming even into fatherhood and, you know, the loss of the family structure, the loss of sons and daughters, and being able to see a new way forward. I think that quote is quite profound. And you want to tell us a bit about this closing image here?
The thing about fatherhood is it impacts, or it actually allows me to be a better photographer. I understand. I remember, quick story, quick. My son came home and he was like, he got a paper to do, and the paper was to find a civil rights leader that he should write on. And he asked his teacher if he could write about his father. And I think that essentially said that I was his civil rights leader, and that all the history that he was getting from me going out and coming back with stories. And that gave me all the motivation I need to continue this work.
Ruddy, is there any piece of advice that you'd like to leave photographers currently using their cameras as weapons, as voices for change?
Keep shooting. I think over time we'll sort out what's authentic or what's not, but keep shooting. Shooting with a very discerning eye. Be open. Allow yourself to be a part of the process. Don't just use it as a voluntary motion. Be very intentional about why you're out in the street photographing. Do it with purpose.
Thank you, Ruddy. I think we could go on and on. There's so many more questions we could ask you. And I know this will not be the last time we're going to be speaking with you on one of these, during these Stay Home with Leica programs. So I thank you so very much.
Thank you, Ruddy. It was great.
And sharing
Thank you all. Thank you.
To see Ruddy's work, please visit him on his website, ruddyroye.com. You'll find some recent photos for time.com, and definitely follow him on social media at Ruddy Roye. Thank you all for joining us. Stay tuned for more, and have a pleasant Sunday.
Thank you all.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Enjoy.